This week, a friend gave me a call, and she was wondering about something that had happened to her and what it meant. So she noticed that outside her window there were a bunch of birds that were creating a nest, and it was the same type of birds and in the same place that birds had created a nest many years ago. And the first time she had noticed that nest, it was about when her children were headed off to go to college, and so she interpreted that as being a sign of children going away, and that's your job, and that was a wonderful message to her that she received. She felt really good about it. But this week, she noticed a similar thing, except for then the nest got abandoned. And she went out to see what was happening and discovered there was a dead baby bird in there. So she called me up and she said, "What does this mean? Do you think God is trying to tell me that something bad is about to happen to my children?" Now, to be sure, she has reasons to be worrying about her children right now. One of them is undergoing some inpatient treatment for some substance abuse and mental health issues. So already she's anxious as she's looking at the signs and portents in the world and wondering what they can mean to her. We human beings love to interpret the world that way. Our minds are always seeking patterns and trying to make meaning out of things. Theologian Will Gaffey talks about this as being the human tendency to make sense of our experience from our limited understanding of God. And all of us have a limited understanding of God. Now, this is a lovely thing when it comes to finding the meaning and presence of grace in our lives. And what I would say is that Scripture is full, just full of stories of God working through history in order to provide grace to us. And grace is that unmerited gift, that which we receive from God, that we can't earn, that is given freely, and that we do not necessarily deserve, but God gives it to us anyway. This grace, these gifts from God, are not intended to chastise us, or punish us, or nag us, or belittle us. But we find them throughout the stories of Scripture as examples of God trying to give to us that which will bind us back to God and bind us to one another. So we come to Joseph's story. And Joseph is one who has dreams that he has some capacity to interpret. That certainly is a theme here. He is one of 12 sons of Jacob. We heard about Jacob in my previous two sermons. We hear about how among the 12 sons, Joseph is favored and the brothers grow annoyed with him, and then angry, and then murderous. Today's first passage tells the first part of that story. His brother Reuben decides that he should be saved from the fate of being killed, and then his brother Judah redirects the evil plan away from leaving him abandoned in the pit into selling him into slavery. And in our second scripture passage, Joseph has lived a truckload of life, and through his capacity to interpret dreams has been able to help Pharaoh stockpile grain and tend to his own people. So because of that, he has been elevated to be the second in command. Years later, starving in their homeland, the brothers resolve to go to Egypt and beg for grain. And there they encounter their brother Joseph. And at first they do not recognize him. Joseph is in the position of power in that particular moment and has all the opportunity to revenge the evil that was done to him. But instead of choosing to do that, Joseph draws close to his brothers, sends all the officials and court people away so he can be alone with his brothers, and draws them close to weep in joy, to ask about his father's well-being, and to draw them close in their common fate, which is that Joseph sees how God's hand must have been involved in all the events of their lives together to make good come out of it. God has subverted the evil that was in human intent and turned it instead to something good. Midrash, that collection of rabbis' stories and reflections, has Joseph saying this to his brother: "You are part of the indestructible national order of the world, the stars, the earth, the world's fauna. You, myself included, are akin to the 12 constellations of the zodiac, underpinning the astrological stability of the world." I love that the rabbi is reading into this things that bring these 12 brothers together in this inexorable and enormously important way. In this way, Joseph is able to reimagine the link that ties this tribe together. Grace, that unmerited gift, has come to him in strange ways to enable him to have power and fortune and privilege. But the grace is not to give him privilege and power and fortune just for his own good. That's not the working of grace. Grace comes in saving him, to be sure, but saving him for the larger purpose of connecting him back with his own people. Now notice that Joseph is the one who makes meaning of these events based on his, albeit, to be sure, limited view of God. There's some cautionary notes for us here. Those who work evil and have not yet turned from that are not the ones who get to interpret the signs of God. Only those who are already standing in grace get to be those who speak for grace's functioning in their lives, in the lives of others, and in the world. And the reason why we need to be careful about that is that no matter how well-intentioned we are, we don't want to turn into Job's comforters. In other words, those who would try to explain the suffering of another person in our theological terms. That is not up to us to do. So Reuben and Judah and the other 9 brothers do not get to say, "See, your suffering was not so bad. See, you have no reason to complain, brother. Your suffering wasn't so bad. God meant that for good." That spoken, even though it's almost the same words as what Joseph might have said, is simply not theirs to do. Rather, only the one who has paid the price for the trauma can now begin to discover the thread of grace and can give authentic voice to that thread of grace as it shows up. The author of Genesis quite intentionally puts this story at the conclusion of his book, and in a passage we didn't read today, has Joseph say, "You, brothers, intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish now what is now being done, the saving of many lives." After we look at this encounter carefully, it becomes clear that recording this for all of us to share in this news is a beautiful message that we can take with us. And I'm going to quote a Jennifer Greenwood who interprets it this way. Family dynamics are often complex, and wrongdoings inevitably occur in every family. Hopefully not as extreme as selling a brother. Parents have many challenges in preserving the peace and integrity of their families, protecting their children from the pains of life, and to the extent possible, and moving towards a legacy which reflects their values. Unresolved issues and regrets sometimes pass on to the next generation, and the children need to take on the responsibility for their resolution. The balance of power among family members is often not balanced. Those in a position to resolve issues might be the ones who are wronged. But no matter. A family has a collective future. Whoever is in a position to promote a more constructive destiny is obliged to lead the way. It is important along this path to empower all members of a family as contributors to this destiny. No single individual can do it alone. Joseph gives us all inspiration. Indeed, those of us who are in a position of power or privilege, even if we are the ones who have been wronged, have the power to extend grace to others. Grace may take a very long and circuitous journey to finally reach us, and it may be that we don't see it particularly clearly because of our limited perspective. God may in fact be lavishing far more grace upon us than we can possibly imagine. Grace is also never about our prosperity alone, never about what we get and what we have. It is rather something that equips us to increase the bonds of fellowship with our brothers and our sisters, our siblings in all of human creation. Grace equips us to serve others, and grace weaves its threads around us, tying us together, bringing us back into the human fold, into the family of God. Grace weaving a long journey will find us as God wills it to be.